Welcome back to Typically Unique. I'm Kim Aponte, and I'm here with my husband, Carlos.
Hello.
And when we left off, we're still in round 5. And for this episode, we have to do something a little unique because we realized, reading through the journals, that where we're at in our timeline so far, that we had to do this part of our story. So we are going to be showing some actual Facebook videos that Carlos had taken back when this was going on. So
right near the end of round 5.
And
right?
yes, this happened right at this time period, right when we left off with the last video. So, and then after what we share with you, we'll continue on with going home for the last time. So,
but this might take a while, right?
Yes,
this may be 3 episodes or so.
Yeah, we're thinking 3 episodes. So, this journal that I wrote is going to explain where we're at. So this was total days 242 and day 40 of round 5. So about a week or 2 before going home. Today, Aiden's ANC was 80, so we are still waiting. He knows he is so close to going home, and he asks us every day, when can I go home? That is just heartbreaking for us because he wants out of there. Carlos is at the hospital with Aiden until Saturday, and then we are bringing Grandma Aponte up for 2 nights because Carlos has to go to Puerto Rico for a business trip. Man, do I wish I could sneak myself in his suitcase. I could use a little sunshine right now. I will return to the hospital on Monday night after work and probably keep the car up there with me, number 1, because we'll be able to just pack up and leave immediately if we get sent home. And number 2, I can drive to the McDonald's that Aiden has been craving. If you saw the video from the hospital the other day, Carlos had a lot of charts and drawings on the whiteboard about Aiden's immune deficiency. We haven't said anything about this until now because we have been doing a lot of questioning with the doctors and investigating on our own. Immune deficiency. When Aiden was 5, he was sent to Rainbow because his white counts were extremely low and he had been sick a lot. When we got there, they told us he had leukemia before they did any tests. After they did the tests, they sat us down and said they made a mistake and he did not have leukemia, but they didn't know what it was. 10 days later, we were home with a diagnosis of Bruton's immune deficiency, and Aiden started his life of IV infusions every month or so. He had an enlarged spleen and was doing well until this past August when he got sick and his counts tanked again, and they told us he had AML. You could imagine our denial when they first told us he had leukemia because we had been down that path before. So now we are in a situation where our child has 2 rare conditions, and we feel any normal person, let alone medical scientists, should be scratching their heads. And Aiden's immune deficiency was diagnosed wrong because there are other blood disorders, we're thinking that can lead to leukemia, like aplastic anemia and about 4 others. I wanted them to test Aiden to make sure he didn't have one of those all along because when we leave the hospital this time, I want to make sure we are treating him exactly the way he needs to be treated for the correct thing. The response I have kept getting over and over from the doctors is just explanation after explanation that they are sure his diagnosis was correct because he was responding to treatment for all these years. It just didn't sit right with me that they weren't willing to investigate anything. So I contacted his first immunologist who diagnosed him but does not practice anymore. He does research now. We left his practice quite a few years ago because it was out of our insurance network. He was very concerned for Aiden and put me in contact with an expert on Bruton's at St. Jude. I sent that doctor his lab work from his original diagnosis, and she responded, he absolutely 100% does not have Bruton's. My heart dropped. So then I shared what I had been doing behind the scenes with Aiden's current AML doctor, and she contacted the St. Jude doctor to get her opinion, and all I know is that the exchange between the two was not pleasant. According to our current doctor, she said that St. Jude doctor would not give her any further information except to say why she knew it wasn't Bruton's. The mutation is not in the correct place for it to be called that. So we had 2 contradicting opinions of what he had. I asked for a third opinion. We had Aiden's lab work sent to a doctor in Cincinnati who worked with Rainbow doctors previously. I was a little skeptical about that, but she agreed with the St. Jude doctor, not Bruton's. They still say it is an immune deficiency, but unnamed. So once we got to that point, and the doctors pretty much kept shutting me down when I kept saying I wanted to know exactly what he has, I just let it go. And that is when Carlos picked up the ball. He started to ask every 3 weeks when Aiden would get his blood drawn what his IgG levels were. That's his immunity level. And he noticed that they were starting to always be high and consistent. So then he started asking the doctors about that. Why is it? How is it possible? Etc. Their responses was that they finally got his dose of IVIG correct. Carlos did not settle for that answer because he had been getting that treatment for 7 years and his numbers were not consistent or high. So he met with the immunologist and got her to run a test that she swore up and down would prove to him once and for all that the chemo was working. So we were at the hospital together the other day, or the day that this test came back, and we were expecting the doctors to be like, oh my God, we certainly weren't expecting this. We really need to find out what was going on, etc. And we pretty much got the opposite. No reaction, no big deal, not really concerned with that. The immunologist came to us with 3 reasons for this. 1, it was a lab error. 2, Aiden's bone marrow is stressed and is cranking out his highest level he can possibly do, but it won't last. And 3, something may be happening. So they're going to wait a month and then do the test again to see what results we get. No one with an immune deficiency like Aiden has ever been treated for AML. So no one knows what the treatment for AML will do to the immune deficiency. Could it cure it? That is our greatest hope. Something is definitely going on, and we are going to keep asking questions until we know for sure. If it doesn't cure it, he just continues with his usual treatment anyway, but we just have that what if hanging out there. If you are on Facebook, you should check out Carlos's video blogs. He did an excellent job documenting the timeline and diagrams for all of this and really explained the details well. That is why I left most of that stuff out. I will keep everyone posted as we enter new territory of leaving the hospital for good, hopefully very soon, and continuing Aiden's care from home and clinic visits.
So let me say one thing to this real quick before we start getting into the videos. So Kim is singularly focused on curing Aiden's AML.
Yes.
All right. That is the life-threatening disease that he has,
yes,
right?
Save our son.
Yep. So that's what the focus is. You know, I've been focusing on the AML and his comfort, but I've been looking at other things, right? We talked a little bit about mental health. We've mentioned Bruton's a couple times. But at the end of the day, this is about, you know, the time we're up at Rainbows is about curing Aiden from AML. Mm-hmm. This, however, you know, unlike the mental health stuff, which, you know, has nothing to do with, you know, his physical health, right? This is something that Aiden despises, getting these shots every 3 weeks and having to be tied to this for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to investigate, and Kim did a good job in, you know, putting ingredients in the pot. Now it was my turn to start stirring it, right? And so I think what you're going to see first is my introduction video, kind of explaining why I put all this data on this whiteboard and kind of set it up. And there's data everywhere.
Yeah, you'll see the big picture and go, oh my goodness.
Yeah. So we'll do this first one, but I want people to know that are listening to this, like on iTunes or something.
Right. If you don't have the visual to go with it.
Yeah, if you can't see what I'm pointing at, or if I say, hey, look at this chart or look at this number, I may not be expressing, the actual number. So we are on YouTube and other platforms where you can see video. But
Yes.
Just to know, if you're on iTunes, we'll do our best to maybe explain a little bit of what we're showing you,
Yes.
but it would be a little bit difficult.
We'll try to describe it the best we can.
Exactly.
So here is the preface video.
Okay, today I was going to do some instructional videos just for Kim and I, but so many of you have been asking about Aiden and his care that I just decided to go ahead and put these videos on our Facebook page. One, so those of you who have been following Aiden can follow what's happening, which would be the start of his aftercare. And for us, it's a place where we can actually store it and go back and look at this later on. The reason I'm putting these videos together is because we hear two words all too often up here, and it's typical and unique. And it's only a reactionary word. After something happens, the medical staff would say, oh, that's typical. After something happens, or before something happens, they say, I don't know, because everybody's unique. So we cannot predict what's been happening with Aiden. And so we've started gathering a bunch of data, and here's that data. So let me pan all the way out. This is the board in Aiden's room. I usually show you just sections of this each day. But we've been following so many things that this is the culmination of that. And as you can see, I've ran out of room. So I need to document this, wipe the board down, and start over with some new information that we're getting. But basically, I'm going to have 4 videos after this one. This is just an introductory video. And the first one is going to be the timeline, which is this right here, from when Aiden was born until today, and things that have been happening in his life. So we have a pretty good timeline as to what's going on. His diagnosis back in 2003 for the Agammaglobulinemia, which was originally called Bruton's, and which caused Aiden to get an IV treatment once a month, and he'll have to have that for the rest of his life. So that was a pretty rare condition that he got back in 2003. Then we're going to document the AML, which is a cancer that he was diagnosed with in August of 2010. And then now the cure, what's going on, kind of his aftercare. We want to document everything that's happened thus far. So if Aiden runs into any other unique diseases, as the doctors would like to say here, we have documented everything that's happened up until this point. So the first video is going to be on timeline, and I'll come back with that. But as you can see, we have documented an awful lot since Aiden's been here. These are our daily journals. These are all of his labs and reports. So as you can see, that's rather thick. And this is just today's report, so I've been using that to help fill out some of my numbers up here. So I'll be back in a little bit with video number 1. All right, so the board was pretty interesting, and I think every white part of that board was covered with something.
You had it very organized, though.
Well, you know, it was all in my head, and I was trying to visually put it up there so I could walk through it myself, right? Because this was just going to be for you and I think I said that at the beginning, right?
We had to make sense of it.
We had to make sense of it, so we put it up on the board. The video was just going to be for you and I, and then I was like, no, I might as well share this and put this out.
But that board was all you.
Oh,
You
yeah.
did the board.
Yeah, well, I had all this data, and I wanted to physically see it. I am a data guy. But you notice how that whole thing started with typically unique, or typical and unique?
Yes. So the first thing you see on the board are those two words, which looking back all these years later, as soon as we saw that video show up, we were like, oh my gosh, we literally wrote that on the board.
And it has been, in some way, shape, or form, our driving force.
Yes.
It was 100% the driving force for me putting this up on the board, and I mentioned a little bit in the beginning of the video, but it was 100% me putting it on the board because those seemed like such dismissive terms every time we heard it. And when we started talking about this Bruton stuff, we heard typical and unique so many times I can't stand it. And one thing I'll say about the journal you read before we watched the video was, you'd mentioned nobody had AML and Bruton's at the same time.
Right.
Nobody's ever been cured of Bruton's that we know of.
Right.
So we're dealing in uncharted territory. So for people to say, that's typical, that's not good enough for us. There are things going on that we're going to talk about that will show that. So one of the things that we did, I did show in the video that those of you on iTunes didn't see, was I was flipping through on the desktop, not the whiteboard, but on the desktop. There was a bunch of journals.
Oh, I loved that.
Yeah.
That you captured that, because in several of our videos so far, we've talked about the journal and you flipped through it, picked it up. So that journal that you showed was just from these 242 days at the hospital. That was all AML in that book. So just us writing down our daily information and questions and things. And then the binder, you got to actually see how thick it was. And there were 5 clear pocket sleeves for each round. So if each round was 30 to 46 days, there were 46 sheets of paper in that.
From rounds.
From every day getting his lab work. That would be the lab work reports. So you saw the binder. And was there one other thing on there?
I think those were the two main things.
Yeah.
But that big binder that you had that had those 5 clear pages with all that data in there, that's where I could go back and pull some numbers.
Right. That's where we were able to see the numbers that we're going to be talking about.
And this may be a teaching moment, to use some of your terminology.
Yeah.
This is a teaching moment that when you get that information, it's good to look at it that day, but save it. We reference back a few times.
Yes.
But for this event that we're about to show you now, having all that history and all that data was super important.
Because you never know when something might come up and you want that historical information. So whatever's in that report. So
right.
That was very helpful.
So, I think in the preface video, we talked about 4 or 5 or 4 things that we're going to talk about. I think I add a 5th. So there's a lot of videos to go along with this, probably 10 in this series. Mm-hmm. So we'll break it up over a few. But I think the next video is about the timeline. So we're going to revisit Aiden's timeline, and we're showing that on the a graph of this timeline for what Aiden was from birth to present day.
Yeah, so when you're hearing it, just visualize just a regular timeline with the dates, and you'll hear what the dates are and what was going on at that time.
Exactly. Yep.
All right, as stated earlier, I was trying to salvage all this data that we've kind of written on the board. And so we're making a video book of all that information. So the first chapter in this video book is going to be the timeline. And the timeline for Aiden is as follows. Aiden was born in December of '97. First 2 years he was not doing too bad. Mostly because he still had remnants of Kim's immune system. Children kind of hold on to that for a year or two. And then after his immune system didn't mature and Kim's was gone, basically in '99, so by the time he was 2 to about the age of 5, Aiden had been in and out of the hospital, very sick. In October of '03, After a very bad episode of illness, Aiden was referred to Rainbows, and we got the diagnosis that he had cancer. Later found out that it was actually an immune disorder called Bruton's. And since then, Aiden has been receiving IVIG treatments since 2003. Kind of fast forward to, and those IVIG treatments, I should say, are every 3 weeks, and have been since this date, and he's supposed to have those for the rest of his life, but we'll talk a little bit more about this later. And this initial cancer diagnosis here, which was a misdiagnosis at the time. So fast forward in May of 2010, Kim started noticing that some of his counts were a little off. They went to the immunologist, who ultimately sent him to an oncologist. And they said, well, the only way we're going to know for sure is if we have a bone marrow test. Aiden said, I want the test. We took the test and found out later that Aiden had cancer, AML. So since August of 2010 until now, April, Aiden has been receiving chemotherapy. So that is kind of the health timeline for Aiden, and we'll explain some more of this as we move forward. That's it for now.
So the video quality is really not that great, is it?
We were just noticing, wow, how long ago was this with the quality of the video?
Which is funny because this was in 2011.
Right, so we were talking about what kind of phone did we have? Did we even have an iPhone, do you think?
And I believe we did, because from work,
Yeah.
I know I got issued iPhone at work,
Right.
so I know I was taking video like that. So we looked up the year,
Yeah.
and we had an iPhone 3. So that tells you how...
They weren't focused on cameras at
No,
that time.
no. So yeah, that was iPhone 3, and we actually talk about. We use a lot of acronyms, and we apologize for that. But that is our language today. Where we can, we try to explain what those acronyms are and how they affect data. And one of them we kept using, and I used on my timeline, was IVIG, and we've talked about that a lot because Aiden gets those every 3 weeks for the rest of his life. What is, Kimmy, IVIG?
Yeah. So that's the actual medicine that he would get. His treatment was called that, and it stands for intravenous immunoglobulins. So that's what they were giving him. He would get it intravenously, and then the immunoglobulins are the antibodies that they would give him. So that's what the IG stands for immunoglobulins.
Yes. So
not easy to say.
I know. Well, that's why I had her say it, because I can't. A quick story. I know, but there was one round that Aiden wanted me to read a book to him, or we had to read a book to him that had a lot of medical terms in it, and Aiden couldn't stand it because I could not read the book at all.
That was funny. Yeah.
And he was like, give me the book. I'll read it. This is horrible. Please don't ever read to me again.
Yeah, I think we might have a video of that.
Oh,
too.
my
That
God,
was
that's
funny.
horrible. But so the next video that we're going to show, the last video that we're going to show.
Well, before we introduce the next clip, that timeline showed, like you were telling me how, we were watching this, your reaction of seeing,
Yes. So,
everything laid out that way. Like seeing it visually really has a different impact than just hearing it and knowing it.
And if the timeline's a yardstick, right? If you envision a yardstick, and the first 2 inches of that yardstick was probably the only time in Aiden's life that he wasn't sick or dealing with some rare disorder or disease or illness. And he doesn't even remember that because he was 2 or younger. Every other time in his life, he was dealing with some type of illness. I mean, the poor kid... I can't even fathom that. I don't like to have a cold.
Yeah, to see it laid out like that, you're like, wow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, not good. So the next video is we're going to introduce some different charts
Starting to show what we were questioning and why. Really, you do a good job explaining why we start questioning
and
what we're questioning.
And I guess maybe to better introduce it is that I don't know what I'm talking about medically, but I have questions that are common sense questions,
And data driven.
Oh, and data driven, right?
And we're all about that.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So, if the data's showing one thing and medically it's unique, but the data's showing something else, then how could this be possible, right? So what is the possible outcome of this data? Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we start to show. We don't get into it too much, but we start to show the foundation of what sparked our interest from that time.
On to Chapter 2. Chapter 1 was the timeline. Chapter 2 is the Agammaglobulinemia, which back in October of 2003 was diagnosed as Bruton's. So that was 9 years ago. And as you can see in this drawing right here, we are separating the bone, or the bone marrow, into the Agammaglobulinemia side, which is the lymphoid side of the stem cell that is created from the bone marrow, creates a white cell. The white cell, I guess, splits into a myeloid cell, which is this side, and we'll talk about that more later, and the lymphoid side, which is this side, which cause Aiden's Bruton's. Okay? So what happens is Aiden has IgG, IgA, and IgM levels that will not mature. As those start to grow, they stop, and they stop right here. In normal immune system, those cells will continue to grow to mature levels and fight infection. In Aiden's body, it starts here. So Aiden has to get IVIG treatment every 3 weeks to artificially put in this IgG. IgA and IgM are not critical for survival, so he doesn't get those. So his levels stop there, and his blood work stops there. But the IgG, the artificial ones, are put in, and we can see those in blood work. So let me show you what that looks like. Aiden's IgG, normal ranges between about 550 and 1100. You can see he stays within normal ranges because they artificially give him that. What was curious though is once Aiden started getting chemotherapy, his levels started to level out and a lot of this noise went away. So I became curious as to why that was happening. We were told by the doctors that IgA is not critical, so he doesn't need it, so they don't give it to him. So as you can see, his numbers are very low, well below the bottom. Same with IgM, well below the bottom range. Okay. However, curiously, Aiden had a recent blood test done, and his IgA and IgM fell within normal ranges. So we had to figure out what was going on there. And right now we don't have an answer, but I'll explain my theory in a little bit.
So hope everybody didn't laugh too much about the drawing and illustrations that I put out there. The bone was...
we were laughing at the bone a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit to be desired, but that's the best I could do.
And it was, if you can't see it, the cartoon, just, how you would draw a dog bone.
A dog
right?
bone, yeah, exactly.
Like.
Yeah, it was the best I could do, but I was trying to explain, in that video that, these cells that are being generated from the stem cell is all coming from the bone marrow, right? And then there's this clear divide that they are talking about that, hey, we're over here on the AML side and this is what we need to focus on. And, let's not worry about that. That's not curable. Let's not even deal with that. And, all this stuff on the AML side is what we need to focus on. But
because it was talking about how the stem cell comes out and splits into two parts. Okay.
Yeah, splits into two parts.
One side is AML, and one side is the lymphoid.
Yeah, lymphoid. Right. So So for me, this illustration helped me move forward with my theories, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why I needed to visually put this on the board, because I had theories, Kim had theories. I think she gave up on it for a little bit. She's like, here, you take it.
I had questions. You really came up with the theory.
Right.
But I definitely was like, what is this? I had the questions, but you started to really make sense of what we were seeing.
Yep. So we threw a few more acronyms at you. So we're going to cover some of those. We talk about IgG, IgA, IgM, and
right.
She's our resident health and safety expert. So Kim, can you say what those are?
Right. So in the video, there were 3 charts showing their antibodies. So we have 3 different kinds of antibodies. Well, there's more than that, but these are the 3 main ones. Right. So IgG is something, that's what they tested Aiden all the time for. That's what they were really monitoring. And that's your antibodies that are, and I looked on the internet and thought I found a verified source. So, I'm not a medical personnel. So this is my understanding that would be found in your blood and your tissue. The IgM was another chart, and they were not monitoring that. Is just in your blood. And IgA also, they were not monitoring until you asked, but is found in your mucous membranes, your tears, and your saliva, which I thought that was interesting. I didn't know that. So, and that's where we started to see,
and
something interesting's going on here.
And IgG is immunoglobulin. What is IgG? Immunoglobulin, right? Ig, immunoglobulin,
yes.
G, immunoglobulin,
I don't know
M,
what the G, the M, and the
immunoglobulin A,
yeah.
right? But it's an immunoglobulin, so that's what Ig is.
Right, and immunoglobulin
yes.
is those are the antibodies.
Right.
Yes.
So, and that's what he's getting, IVIG, intravenous immunoglobulin. So we bring the 2 together.
Yes.
So see what we did there? All right. So,
yes.
Again, right?
Yeah. So, we're going to get into the next parts of this, continue this on in our next video. If you would like to see all these Facebook videos and you're listening on a platform where you couldn't see them, you can find us at Typically Unique on YouTube. Spotify also is now showing videos on their site as well. And you can also find us there under Typically Unique. We're Typically Unique everywhere.
Yes. All right.
Just like at the hospital.
Until next time.
And we will see you back here for the next part. Bye.
Bye.